Thank you for joining us for today's Coffee Talk. My name is Sean O'Brien, and as always, I'm pleased to be joined by Steve Huntington. Steve, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Thanks everybody for joining us for another round of Coffee Talks. My name is Steve Huntington. I'm the Director of Analytics here at Optima FI, formerly Quick Rate and Quick Analytics. Um, I apologize today in advance if my speech is a little bit hard to understand. I had a really exciting dental procedure just the other day, and the whole left side of my face, I feel kind of like the Godfather, and it's all swollen up over here. So I will do my best, and I will attempt to speak maybe a little bit less, but we'll see how it goes, shall we?
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for playing hurt today. Equally as exciting is to be joined by our dear friend Paul Allen from Saltmarsh. Paul, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I always enjoy the conversations about CECL. My name is Paul Allen. I'm a director with Saltmarsh and in our financial institution practice. And we've had the pleasure of working with financial institutions now at the firm for over 80 years. Certainly, Sean, the last, say, 10 years have been a lot more interesting or so. But happy to be here and very grateful for the opportunity to work with financial institutions across the United States. So,
Thank you very much, Paul. Thanks for joining us. Just a reminder, while the names have changed, everything here working still the same: Quick Rate, Infusion Marketing, and IntelliCredit. Now you know them as Optima FI Growth, Optima FI Credit Risk, and Optima FI Balance Sheet. So again, all the same people, all the same great products and services, just being referred to collectively under one new banner. So just a reminder for that. As always with our presentations today, please know we will send out a link to today's recording along with a copy of the slides. Throughout the presentation, use the chat feature or the Q&A feature. We will monitor those and take the questions at an appropriate stop in the conversation, but certainly welcome and encourage you to submit any questions that you might have. Just introduction and then reminder, in October, Optima FI is kicking off their first Insights Exchange. It'll be held in Boston in October. Registration is complimentary. We certainly encourage you to learn more. We will have two prominent keynote speakers, Rodney Hood and Yelena Shulatayeva from the conference board. During that time, there will also be client panels, executive roundtables, a chance to network, and some very fun social activities. So we certainly encourage you to learn more and hopefully register for that event coming in October. So when we do have Paul on, we always want to take advantage of his insights and expertise. So we're going to start off today's coffee talk with Paul, just giving you some comments and thoughts on what he's seeing currently. Paul?
absolutely. Well, as we've been talking over the last year, perhaps, CECL has moved from a big new process and implementing a big new process to now what has become somewhat a normal process. And so, that's been helpful that we've gotten our legs underneath us and we're able to kind of think about and talk about what we should do as an ongoing process. And so there's three areas that continue to be the focus on the internal controls or risk management, if you will, over the CECL model and CECL calculation. And so first and foremost, the management team and the board and the supervisory committee, has to make sure that there is some governance and validation over the process that goes into how we handle the data that we put in, how we come up with the assumptions and have some approval process, and whether or not the model periodically we step back and whether the model is giving us the kind of information or reports at the end that appear to be reasonable and prudent and consistent with actual practice. So model governance and validation of the process continues to be a focal point for examination teams and auditors as they come in. It should be something that the management team and the supervisory committee or board periodically visit and say, do we have controls over this process? The second item that we call data mapping has consistently been an issue. When we first implemented CECL, it was pretty difficult, quite honestly, to decide where does my data go into the model? How am I getting it in there? Recently, as all of us have been more focused on developing new loan products and solution and new deposit products and solutions, we're starting to see new products being developed or new features. And sometimes when we put those new processes together, we inadvertently, combine them with some other existing process and somehow end up that we put two things in that have a different risk profile into one area. So we continue to check data inputs into the different models for our clients, and we still see oops incidents, if you will. And of course, all of the regulatory agencies, because they use the call report information for their desk reviews and for oversight, all of the regulatory agencies are continually focused on the accuracy and integrity of call report information. So, this is an area that's a direct responsibility of management to make sure that your data is being handled accurately, and that as you develop new products and new features of products, that we're making sure that we're not combining two things that have a different risk profile and are likely to behave differently into one line. And I don't think it's any surprise to you on that last point. I was mentioning earlier that just sat through two different economic presentations, and one of them was titled Certain Uncertainty. So there is a lot of information, a lot of things going on, both domestically and globally. We're all watching the Fed, the new Fed chairman, and trying to figure out how they handle whether rates are going up or down. Sean, I think I'll remind you that back November of this past year, we would have all bet that we would have rates down in this year.
Yeah.
And now everyone is deciding when will rates go up. And certainly we're seeing some dissension in the voting. And we're also seeing some recent news. The federal deficit is at an all-time high, and there's certainly been a shift in how the Fed is repricing and positioning its balance sheet. So we're moving a lot of attention to current shorter duration in the economic debt. And so what does that imply for future rates? And if rates continue to move up along with inflation and the impact of the global situation in terms of oil prices being high, that drifts into plastic, that drifts into a lot of manufacturing, so it tends to put some pressure on our consumers and our borrowers. And so the economic factors right now are probably something that we need to spend some time thinking about and determining whether the assumptions we've used for the last couple of quarters, should they be revisited? So where are we going with the economic factors? So those three things, those three areas, just a gentle reminder, those are the areas that management and the board and the supervisory committee and the ALCO committee, the credit committee need to be kind of focused on is the model working as we intend it to? Is it giving us good information from which we can make our decisions? So nothing dramatically new there. It's just a reminder that right now we have to make sure that we're taking care of the controls around the process and that our data is coming in correctly. And then we've got to slow down and take a breath and be more thoughtful probably on the qualitative factors. Does that make sense? Is that consistent, Steve and Sean, with what you're seeing as well?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
Okay. The next slide there is hate to be a cynic or bring bad news, but unfortunately, we are seeing some tick up in the things that would indicate that perhaps our reserves, we may have to revisit that. Generally speaking, we're doing okay on an overall reserve to loans and our overall coverage, but we are wondering if we'll start to see more charge-offs than we've had in the last couple of years. And of course, when that happens, we shift the way that we calculate the reserve more on actual historical charge-offs and less on qualitative factors. And so that one can catch people off guard pretty quickly. So looking at the impact of some of the economic factors and then trying to translate that into the credit environment in our particular market areas. And so I, I'm always hesitant to say this, but we've been waiting for the credit cycle to turn for a long period of time. We've been in a long period of time of a very bull credit market, and everyone has been saying, well, it's right around the corner. Well, it appears that we're getting closer to the corner. I don't know where that corner is, but so the question is, we probably need to revisit and say, what are my qualitative factors? Are we sure that we've got a pretty good handle on that? It's very common to use national GDP, national unemployment. I would encourage folks to be looking at those, but more specifically, looking at your local market. Sometimes state averages will do that, but sometimes, I live in the state of Florida. There's a huge difference in the market in Miami, Florida, than perhaps in our more rural areas in northern Florida, more agricultural. So, what are the best numbers to use? And I'm a huge advocate, and I so appreciate quick analytics and the tools that you provide because using peer analysis is really kind of helpful. If I were if I were the CFO of a financial institution, I don't want to be leading the pack, and I don't want to be at the end of the pack. So I really want to make my best guess of what I think is appropriate, and I kind of feel really comfortable knowing I'm not alone, standing alone in left field. Other people are kind of making similar conclusions. So I think over the next few quarters, we're going to be talking a lot, Sean, about directional consistency. So,
Yeah.
is my reserve level and my coverage ratio, my coverage level consistent with what I'm seeing in economic factors and also my own charge rates and so forth. So, uh, let me just be quiet there for a minute. Sean and Steve, please add anything you have. I don't mean to be overly cynical or pessimistic. I just think things are probably changing here over the next 12 months a little bit.
I think I think the, as you start off with the economic discussion, just saying, certain uncertainty, right? You just have, as always, you have conflicting factors, right? I mean, there's no question inflation has, just a cumulative effect upon borrowers and just individuals that takes some time to develop. But for a lot of us in our financial institutions, we've been kind of buoyed by the fact that asset values have increased so
Exactly
strongly
right.
that it's mitigated some of the impact that you would normally see from this cumulative inflation impact because people have other sources of strength that they might be able to tap into. And so you really have these, two burgeoning things that are both rising. And, if asset values were to drop, right, you could just have a whole different sense and feel for how our borrowers are acting. Whereas now I think, for many, there's still a lot of confidence because they do have these strong asset values. And so, yeah, you have to monitor them. I think your point about the local market is everything because again, they can get sometimes masked in a larger audience of state or national numbers. But again, I think being directionally consistent to your factors that you use and looking at your portfolio is always a healthy exercise to review those, in particular your Q factors, this time of the year.
Yeah,
Steve?
and I think there's a difference between your individually assessed loans that you think may have an issue from a performance standpoint versus what losses you expect to see if they were to have considerable problems and need to be charged off, right? Because asset values and collateral values seem to be doing quite well. We find a lot of times individual credit unions will have the majority of their loans in their collectively assessed pass portfolio and a handful of individually assessed loans and find that they're keeping less reserve, even on a percentage basis, on some of the individually assessed loans just because the collateral values and asset values have held up so well, which seems obviously very backwards. But from a purely accounting standpoint, we've been seeing a lot more of that recently.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And of course, the great unknown here is whether or not we will see pass or performing loans get pushed into non-performing categories because of the pressure of inflation, um, oil prices, and so forth like that. We've seen a huge dramatic move in when tariffs were first announced to what they've actually worked out to be, and how much of an impact that's made. Certainly, that has not been widespread, but it has affected certain industries and certain markets much more than it has widespread. And so for all of those things, we get back to data mapping, and we have to look at the economic or qualitative factors and say they're not going to affect the whole portfolio the same way. Certainly, for auto loans, you do look more at unemployment and GDP and inflation. For the larger commercial credits, you look at the pressure points that would change the collateral valuation of commercial property, for example. So not all of the factors impact every line or component within our loan portfolio in the same way. So again, it kind of, to me, it just is a reminder we don't know what we don't know about the next 12 months. And so I want to slow down. I don't want to just assume that the same factors will go forward automatically. We probably want to be thoughtful about that. And I'd be a student of the economy right now. I think I was mentioning to you, Sean, I sat through two economic presentations earlier in the week, and one was a little bit more pessimistic, and one was a little bit more optimistic, and slightly different perspectives of the two speakers. But both of them, talked a lot about how, for example, we thought coming out of COVID that office properties would be, as a commercial real estate, the collateral would go down pretty badly. It hasn't happened that way. Certainly in some large urban markets, there's more of an impact on office space. But what has happened more recently is that there's been more pressure on multifamily properties. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But, perhaps we overbuilt a little bit. Perhaps people are having to tighten their belt. We have a K-shaped economy, so to speak. Some people are doing really well, some people not so much. And so some elements of the economy, some demographics, having more pressure and not being able to perhaps rent as much space at the price that some multifamily developers wanted. So again, that certainly is different in different markets, but we're seeing some pressure on multifamily and perhaps a little bit less pressure on office space. For example, in markets that are not considered large urban markets. So once again, time to slow down and be very thoughtful in terms of how we go forward. And I guess that kind of takes us, to the next slide where we talk a little bit about where are we going with that? Where should we go? And in that step, I would probably be having some discussions about how what is the risk profile and risk appetite of the board and the institution given its market, its geographic market, the type of loan products that we have in the loan portfolio. What should we be looking at that any differently over the next few quarters? And then it's very, very common these days for institutions to buy loan participations and other credit positions that are not actually in their geographic market. So are we contemplating that? In other words, are we using our local market qualitative factors on loans that are not in our market? So is there a separate calculation or thought process on for loan participations or other credit positions that may not be in our market? And then, of course, if we've moved recently into opened up a new geographic market, you know, how are we factoring that into the ACL? And then that last point is just a recognition that as if in fact things get worse and we start having more charge-offs, the ACL calculation is going to be built more on historical charge-offs and less on qualitative. And so how will we factor that in? We certainly do not want to continue a real high qualitative factor thinking we're going into the bottom of the market when once we pass the bottom and go up, we want to take some of the qualitative away and lean more on historical. Well, are we ready for that? And will that surprise anyone? So, Steve, I'm kind of curious your thoughts on that. I mean, obviously, that's a little bit of a shift of leaning on one side versus the other side and what actually makes up our reserve.
And we talk a lot about that with customers, users, and I've talked brought that up on a bunch of coffee talks in the past. That sort of balance between the historical losses and the Q factors driving the ultimate the ultimate reserve calculation. And one thing that I found is challenging is when an institution has, let's say, zero historical losses and it's 100% Q factors, and you have some Q factors built in because of some actual, let's say, not just general, but some actual weakness you've recognized in some of your credits, and then that weakness comes to pass, and you have a charge off in the portfolio that you had no historical losses, but a large Q factor adjustment. And then institutions come to us and say, why is my reserve, why is my required reserve or expected future loss rate double what it was last quarter? And we go through the process of, all right, you've now, you don't want to keep the same Q factor adjustment if that Q factor was based upon a potential future loss that you have now realized it is now part of the historical record, right? So
Yep.
there's a now there's doing it, and then there's justifying it and getting past it with an examiner, right? And those are two different things. It makes perfect sense intuitively that if I expected a future loss that hadn't happened and I had reserved for it and now it's happened, I'm just shifted the burden from the future to the past. But then you have to explain the exact reasoning to examiners to why an examiner might not be comfortable with, well, your Q factors, dropped. You had a negative Q factor adjustment when you used to have a positive Q factor adjustment. And you have to go through the process of explaining to them, because the nature of a Q factor is the expectation of something that hasn't happened, and it's actually happened now. I don't expect it to happen again. And so it's a process, right? But whenever your historical loss rates change, whenever your experience of losses change, you necessarily have to reevaluate qualitative factor adjustments, even if nothing else has changed. Just the shift of an expected loss into the historical realized category is a huge trigger and necessitator of reevaluation of the Q factor adjustment.
Yeah, and hearing speakers talk about this, even from the regulatory examination. As we moved into preparing for CECL and so forth, there was a lot of discussion about what could happen and what would be my reaction. And so there was a lot of discussion back at that time, and it continues today, that says if my historical charge-offs go up, if charge-offs go up, I have to step back from that and say, is that because I had the charge-off that I was predicting in my qualitative factors? Or is the economic environment exactly the same, but I changed my underwriting, or I had some other reason for that charge off that wasn't contemplated? We're assuming that most of the time our charge offs will go up because we predicted them in the past through qualitative factors. But we do have to sort of explain that, like you said, Steve, it's a fair question for an examiner or auditor to say, I notice your charge-off experience has gone up. And does that mean your qualitative adjustment should be adjusted? Is that the realization of a prediction, or is it some other reason causing those charge-offs to go up? In which case, your qualitative factors may still be the same or maybe change because of other economic conditions. So once again, it's that thoughtful slowing down and going, where's my environment? What's happening over the last, 3 months or 6 months? And then using that to try to develop the estimate moving forward. So the overriding encouragement or message is things deserve some thoughtful slowing down right now and sort of reevaluation as we go through the next 12 months or so. Sean, is that too harsh? Asking too much?
No, I think it's spot on, right? Because again, there is a lot going on, and like you said, different expectations have changed, and so I think we are constantly in a state of reevaluating, where things are and where we have the emphasis for our reserves. But no, I think this is a healthy exercise that we all have to do. We did have a couple of questions come in. What are the economic factors that are best correlated to loan losses, and what are other FIs looking at?
And that one's a little tricky because some of the factors impact some components of the loan portfolio more. So, for example, automotive losses have historically been tied and had a correlation to basic things like unemployment rate and GDP growth. So the general economy sort of predicted the impact on consumer behavior. That having been said, we had an interesting experience when we moved from pre-COVID through COVID. It used to be that most analysts would consider that if you got into economic crisis, consumers would make their house payment first and would make sure that they did not lose their house. As we moved forward in the economy and we went through 2008, 9, and 10, and then again through COVID, it sort of changed in the priority, and consumers generally would make their car payment first because they had to have the car to get to the job, take children to childcare, whatever. And at the same time, we saw a little bit more of a complicated approach where if you wanted to foreclose on somebody's primary residence, it took longer, and the borrower was allowed to stay in their house longer. So the car shifted to be more important. So there is definitely a difference in the economic factors as it applies the correlation, if you will, to different components of the loan portfolio. But most people will look at the probability of rate increases, market rates, because most borrowers, if they have a loan coming up and they have to refinance, they may have been able to support the payment in a lower rate. So refinancing causes additional credit stress. Unemployment certainly makes a difference. The employment rate, the employment position, and then the general economy, which often is used. Often people use the GDP of the local market. Is the economy itself shrinking or growing, and therefore job creation becomes impactful. Steve or Sean, I'll be quiet for a minute. Do you see a direct correlation in any particular areas that you'd like to mention?
No, I think you pretty
Yeah.
well covered it from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and again, they're all going to be somewhat unique too. They might be stronger for some institutions than others, but on a broad basis, I would say no. I
Yeah.
totally agree. The second question was, and this was really for Paul, and the answer is yes. Does Saltmarsh perform third-party CECL reviews? And so there was a question on that.
Yes, we do. We probably perform about I don't know, 100 of those a year, something like that. We work with financial institutions across the United States. We do those reviews remotely for the most part, so we are agnostic as to where the financial institution is. And we like CECL Solver the best, but we're agnostic toward the model too. We do all different models that are out there. So yes, we do those and would be happy to help out. If please send me a quick email. I'll be happy to walk you through how that process works. But I will tell you that examination teams are really focused on periodic reviews and are trying to get away from saying annual reviews. So there is a great shift in risk management toward risk assessment and making sure that the management team is aligning the relative risk and risk profile of your institution. So I do not want to tell you, I don't want you to walk away thinking, oh, well, that means we have to have an annual validation. This is like anything else in the process of the institution. You should think about your audit resources and your audit plan, and you should periodically have it reviewed by someone, independent of the institution and the vendor, but it does not have to be an annual process.
Perfect. Awesome. So Matt, yeah, we'll make sure you have Paul's info, and Paul, we'll get you Matt's info as well. Okay. All right. I guess we've kind of touched on this, but any final comments on this slide, Paul?
No, I just wanted to reemphasize the fact that it was kind of amusing at first when we were implementing models. Auditors and examiners would walk in and say, "Do you have a CECL model?" "Yep." "Good. Let me see the report." "Good. See you
Right.
later." And they've certainly been getting lots and lots and lots of training on the details of model validation. All of the regulatory agencies have white papers and guidance out on what the expectation of model validation. All of that guidance generally speaks to management's responsibility for making sure there are internal controls over data integrity and how assumptions are supported and approved by a governance committee and then put in. So data implementation and then output controls, who's getting the report and is it being discussed? Is it being monitored? If you're outside of your policy, I want to see it in the minutes that you've reported that to someone and that there's an action plan. So it is similar to a lot of the other processes we have inside the financial institution, and it's become business as usual. But the expectation continues to get a little bit stronger each year in terms of why are you using what you're using, and are you being thoughtful about it? And again, I go back to peer analysis tools, and again, we use quick analytics. We think that's a great tool to use. There's other tools out there, but I encourage you to use some kind of peer analysis to kind of support that what you're doing is reasonable within the industry and reasonable for your risk profile.
Thank you very much. Okay. Steve, do you want to talk a little bit about updates for CECL Solver?
I guess I have to talk now. Sooner or later, it was inevitable. So we do have a couple updates and enhancements to CECL Solver and to call report insights in general that's available for credit unions. I'd like to first, we talked about this last time, a couple months back on our last coffee talk, was the ability for you credit unions to build completely custom peer groups now. So if you go ahead and yeah. And just as a reminder, whenever we make updates and enhancements to any of the functionality on call report insights in general or CECL Solver specifically for the CECL Solver tool and modeling, any enhancements that we make are not changing the basic functionality or the basic math that we use in our methodology. They are just different presentations of some of the outputs. We make sure that if you like doing it a certain way, that we might provide a new alternative down the road, but that the way you're doing it now will always be preserved. So they're all optional. Custom peer groups. We talked about this last time, just reminding everyone, if you haven't gone in and played around with that, I highly encourage you to do so. As we know, the NCUA has a handful of peer groups that they use for peer comparisons, and they're just peer groups 1 through 6 based solely on asset size. And the NCUA reorganized itself around those 3 regions about 6 or 7 years or 5 or 6 years ago at this point now, East, West, and South. But we all know credit and credit risk is highly local. And so we wanted to make sure that you had some additional flexibility in not just comparing your historical performance to other similar sized credit unions in the United States or in your region or maybe even in your state, but get a lot more granular than that. So our new ability to build custom peer groups, any filter, any financial filter you can shake a stick at, number of branches, number of members, different financial characteristics, different asset size ranges. If you want to kind of dial in geographically where your peer group, where you think is appropriate from a peer group standpoint, and financially, you can do that very intuitively and easily now using our custom peer groups. So if you head to the what we mentioned last time was that it was coming soon on the credit unions or credit union universe at a glance. That's now happened. So I'm going to show you that in just a second here. If you head to the next. So this now, when you log in to Call Report Insights, you'll have a new up on the navigation bar on the top. You'll see custom peer groups. You can come in there, create new custom peer groups with any combination of financial and non-financial filters that you like. Save them, give them a name, and then they can live here. You can build as many different peer groups as you'd like, and they'll always be remembered right here. You can share them amongst different people at your institution or keep them private for your individual login. Next slide. That's what the page looks like. You can search by, you can use a build-up method, right? Search for institutions by name and add them one at a time. Or you can say, show me all the credit unions with between 500 and 10,000 members that are in these 5 counties or my state or just my city, and slice and dice it that way till you get exactly the list that you're looking for. This is, we have kind of given a 2.0 to the credit union universe at a glance. If you are using a custom peer group specifically for CECL Solver, this is a great tool to come in here now. On our main page, there's always there's a link to Credit Union Universe at a glance. And what this does is just provide some basic filtering and financial information about any group of banks that you want. So if you can now pull up your custom peer group, get that list of institutions of credit unions that are in your custom peer group, and see some basic financials about all those institutions individually. And on the bottom, we have a bunch of statistics: mean, median, average, max, min, all that good stuff. And you can sort by any of the metrics. So if you want to sort, looking at credit unions in your neck of the woods, and you want to sort by fee income, if you want to sort by deposits, if you want to sort by asset quality, performance, anything like that, you can do that with a custom peer group or an NCUA peer group, or just, show me all the ones in North Carolina, or all the ones in North Carolina that are under 500 million in total assets. So just a very quick and intuitive way to slice and dice the industry, or your custom peer groups, and just have some financial information at your fingertips that you can peruse. That's what that is. All right, just some quick trends, updated financial trends. As Paul had mentioned, we continue to, well, we very closely track credit quality in the industry, and we look at whatever indicators are available with the publicly available information that we have access to in Call Report Insights. And there is a significant amount of seasonality, as you can see here, when it comes to delinquencies. The little kind of mini trend lines on the right-hand side there see, peaks at the end of each year, and then drops in the first quarter of each successive year, and then kind of coming back up as we go throughout the year. And so when we're comparing these numbers, doing it on a linked quarter basis is usually less helpful. Looking at the same quarter, same period from previous years gets you a better sense of directional trends. And we not only look at things at the median, but we also look at things at the margin, at the 75th percentile, at the 90th percentile. When we have a category of loans that doesn't seem to be having any particular issues at the median, does that mean that the institutions that are having issues with that metric, are those issues getting worse? So that's when you can look at a 75th or a 90th percentile and see the banks that are having problems here, the credit unions that are having problems here, are they having more problems than they did last year or less problems? And so it's just different ways to get at these trends, even when the median values don't necessarily show them yet. Next slide. So this is our long-ish, not long, 4-5-year trend in reserves. The story there, we all know that story. We know what happened in 2022, 2023. We saw the increase in reserves as a result of a change in methodology to CECL. And what we saw since then has been a continued trickling up of reserve levels, which is interesting because this is not what we have seen for community banks as much. When we're looking at commercial banks, even small one branch, two branch, commercial community banks, if you will, had the initial change to the CECL methodologies had a greater impact. I wouldn't say but there was a greater impact. And since then, we've seen flat to slightly declining reserve levels. But with credit unions, in most size ranges, we saw less of an initial impact and more of a continued trickling up, if you will, of reserve levels. It's been relatively flat for the past couple quarters, as you can see on the right-hand side there, but we haven't seen any sustained decrease in reserve levels amongst most credit unions like we have seen to a somewhat of an extent in commercial community banks. Next slide. So when you're looking at reserves, we don't want to look at that in a vacuum. What matters? What are we reserving for? Problem loans. So when we look at delinquent loans, as I showed on the a couple slides earlier, a lot of seasonality, right? This is when you see first quarter is the highest, first quarter drops, and it's worked its way back up, and it zigzags like that. It'll continue to do that probably forever. So what's important here is looking at those peaks, and are those peaks increasing, and is the rate of increase, the first derivative going up or going down? And we see, if you just look at the peaks, which are the fourth quarters here, it continues to go up, but I would say it looks like the uptrend has somewhat leveled off. The increase between fourth quarter of 2024 and fourth quarter of 2025 was 3 basis points. Compared to the last 4-quarter difference between 56 and 68, a 12 basis point, and then 56 and 44. So 12 basis points, 12 basis points, 3 basis points. What the rest of this year holds, none of us know. Well, maybe Paul knows. I don't know personally. But what we see here is delinquent loans continuing to increase, maybe the rate of increase decreasing, but we don't want to read too much into that. We just need to keep in mind the relative levels of delinquent loans and what our reserve account is doing.
Yeah, and there's directional consistency between those two charts that you just showed. In other words, we've seen the loan reserve going up
Mm-hmm.
as delinquent loans went up. Perhaps
Mm-hmm.
not dollar for dollar, but nonetheless the directional consistency, and that is something that auditors and examiners look to is whether those factors are moving in sort of a directionally consistent way. So,
Yeah, in lockstep to some
yeah.
extent. And like we said, unlike the commercial community banks, we have seen what we would have expected in that lockstep, maybe not to the same degree for credit unions. Next slide. And this was just we did this last time and got a lot of positive feedback on it. I just wanted to update it for the second quarter. Just looking at reserve levels at different sizes of credit unions, right? The biggest and the smallest credit unions have the highest reserves from a percentage standpoint. NCUA Peer Group 2, which is 2 to 10 million in assets, that's the blue line on the top. They've seen the biggest increase in reserves over the last couple quarters, and they have the highest average reserve levels. And then second is that brick red color. Those are the largest credit unions that have seen it's certainly flattened out over the last year, but they still have the highest or higher reserve ratios than smallish to medium sized credit unions. Although that gap has certainly decreased over the last year. There was a much more prominent, or not much more, but a statistically significant more prominent gap between the larger credit unions and the medium sized credit unions from a reserve standpoint 2 years ago, and that gap has shrunk somewhat over the last few quarters. So I thought it was an interesting one to reprise. And just reminding everyone, we have the CECL Solver user data. We had some bumps in the road with the data. I am falling on my sword and apologizing publicly to everyone on the call today. We had some significant delays in having that data that we know you rely on for WARMs, Q factors, reserve levels for all the few hundred credit unions that are using the CECL Solver tool. I won't get into the nitty-gritty details of it, but we have all the data that's been resolved and cleaned up, and now it's all available again, first quarter and second quarter. So all the June 30th stuff should all be available publicly on the website now for trends in WARMs and Q factors and reserve levels by segment for our user base, which continues to grow. We've had over 700 different credit unions have run CECL Solver scenarios. 48 states, still coming for you, Alaska. I promise, one way or another. Smallest institutions under 10 million in assets, and our largest customers over $8 billion in loan portfolio, averaging $300 to $400 million on average. They've run more than 12,000 scenarios and over 250,000 segment level data points for WARMs, Q factors, and reserve levels, now all fully updated for June 30th. And so it's just a very robust data set that can, of non-public information that really helps you guys when it comes to justifying what calculations and methodologies you're using to know that it's within reason compared to other institutions that with data that otherwise you could not kind of publicly find to compare yourselves to. Next slide. I think I just have a screenshot of it. There's a screenshot. It's updated for the second quarter, as you can see on there. And then in the last slide, just a reminder of those trends right now. The one on the left are WARMs, and we can see that the weighted average remaining maturities continues to slowly decline. It was almost at 3.8%, I'd say, on or not percent, 3.8 years 2 or 3 years ago, and has kind of continued to slowly decline. Whether that has more to do with assumptions about prepayments or just durations in general of the portfolios, we continue to see a slight consistent decline in weighted average remaining maturities, kind of across the board. And reserve levels, the one I showed you before was publicly available data at 5300 from the call reports. This is completely proprietary data from the usage of our CECL solver tool, and it always provides me, I sleep well at night when I see that those trends of our users that are based on internal data happen to match up very well with the publicly available data that we see on the rest of the industry. And that's what you see here. Reserve levels continue to incrementally increase, not just at the median, but also we look at, again, looking at that 75th and 25th percentiles, giving you that range of experience for your peers, I'd say is arguably more important than where just the median line happens to fall. Paul, John?
No, that's true. It shows you the whole range rather than just one value. So that's very helpful.
It's, is the median increasing or decreasing? Yep, certainly important, but and not just how far, what's the difference between the median and the 75th percentile, right? How dispersed are these levels within that? Give you an idea for what to expect in your next exam for how close are you to the median, but how widely dispersed is the range of experiences that institutions have, and is the gap between the 75th and the 25th percentile increasing or decreasing? So all these different things can be helpful in planning.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Paul. We'll open it up for questions. Again, if you have any questions, submit those in the chat feature or the Q&A section. Just a reminder, if you'd like a demo of CECL Solver, please reach out to Lauren. Her email is listed there below. We certainly welcome and encourage you to do that. We also, you'll notice there's a new FI Insights Hub, just a collection of articles, so build your knowledge on a number of different topics. So certainly encourage you to visit the new tab on the website for the Insights Hub. I don't see any additional questions. Paul or Steve, any final comments before we let everybody go for the weekend?
Not right now.
Okay. Well, thank you to Paul for joining us today. Thanks, as always, to Steve for putting together the presentation. Thank you to you for joining us and continuing to support these coffee talks. Look for our next one, and certainly encourage you again to look into the event in Boston in October. But we thank you for joining us today. Have a great weekend, and we will see you on the next coffee talk. Bye now.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.